welcome back to the Getting Over It podcast. Second episode in this debate series. Today we're going to talk about line judges and whether there should actually be any line judges anymore. Is there a need for such a thing in tennis in this modern day, given advances in technology? We did sort of touch upon it during Wimbledon, and obviously we have during the COVID pandemic used electronic kind of line judges, especially because obviously they were basically trying to minimize the number of people that were in the court premises. So we've kind of had a glimpse into what it would be like. And obviously then since kind of COVID's died down a little bit, obviously it's still around, but tournaments have kind of gone back to normal. Line judges have come back into it. There did seem to be a lot of dodgy line calls, shall we say, during Wimbledon, or at least, a lot of line calls that were being shown to be incorrect by Hawkeye. I don't know what you think about this. Do you think we are kind of inevitably sliding in that direction whereby line judges are going to be basically irrelevant, at least at the bigger tournaments where the technology is there? And there's some other technology.
There's some other technology. When we talk about whether line judges are irrelevant or not, at the moment I wouldn't say they're irrelevant. But what I would say is, yes, we are inevitably heading towards complete, automation of that side of the game. And I think it would be silly to say otherwise, because one thing for certain is that if we use line judges, human error, it's been shown across so many different things to be very variable. This is something that I actually study every now and then as well. But it's also the fact that compared to digital error, especially when you have all these cameras in the same places, it's a lot more consistent. So, if there is a challenge, then, you can look back over things, but it would also reduce the need for that to be there as well. So, yeah, like I say, I think that ultimately line judges are probably a dying trade. Not quite sure that all tournaments will see it that way. Say, take a tournament like Wimbledon, for example, some of those traditions, they're going to want to be kept, merely for the sake of, that's what we want in a game. And that's how the game started. But ultimately, I think most tournaments would benefit from the use of things like Hawkeye.
Do you think it would take anything away from the spectacle, should we say, if line judges were not to be there? Would it not feel a little bit kind of, I don't know, robotic, or I don't know what the correct word is, but when it's just like a computer saying, "Oh," and so does that even matter that much?
I think, potentially it could take some of the personality out of the game, which, people could be concerned about. A lot of people like tennis for some of these traditions. The idea of lines judges coming in, it's another hobby that a lot of people do. Like, people get involved with tennis, people who can't really play necessarily that well, or they want to be on that world stage, but they're not capable of being there at a playing standard, so they go into it from that side of things. I think there are a lot of potential reasons people might want to keep it, but ultimately I would say that they are less relevant. For me, it comes down to that age-old thing, which just because it's always happened that way doesn't mean it's the right way. But it was the best available way at the time. Again, a tournament like Wimbledon might see it differently, because they're all about the history and how the game had set up and stuff like that. But yeah, I think looking at the tour, you could cut down time in the matches alone by taking out lines judges and the idea of challenging as well.
Yeah, although then I suppose you would say that takes out the whole the whole challenge thing has almost become its own little event, or little events within tennis matches where the crowd can get involved.
Also
so
true.
You're going to get rid of that. Because I remember when going to Wimbledon this year, the challenges was it was a great way of kind of sparking the crowd into life, maybe if it was the match was kind of in a bit of a lull or whatever. So you're kind of going to remove that, and it's just, it's going to become, as we said, the personality is going to be removed a little bit. So I suppose that would be the argument against it. Also, in terms of like, obviously there is human error involved when it's line judges making these calls, but it seemed to me during Wimbledon at least that I wasn't convinced that some of these calls by Hawkeye were actually correct as well, and there did seem to be a bit of, even from the players' side, they were surprised at some of the calls that were being made. It seemed to be like more balls were being called in than actually seemed to be in. I don't know what your thoughts on like the whole margin of error thing in terms of technology. Like if it's consistent margin of error, does it matter that much?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because when we talk about this is you got to think about it. This is technically early days of the technology. In 50 years, we could be seeing a completely different side of it and much more accurate side of it. For anyone that doesn't know, the concept of Hawkeye or VAR, for example, in football, they all work by having cameras placed all the way around the court, different heights and different levels. Those cameras all record basically everything all at the same time. And then effectively what it comes down to is a piece of software takes all of those camera feeds and is able to process where it believes the ball was through the use of all of those cameras. So it can track it across all of these camera frames. So on the basis of that, it sounds very, very clever. And it sounds almost unlikely to ever create serious error. One thing that does concern me is the compression of the ball. So, when a ball is hit differently, whether you hit topspin, whether you hit it flat, whether you hit a smash or a serve or something like that, changes how much the ball compresses when it hits the ground. And I think that's one of the things that's harder for something like something like Hawkeye to take into account. Again, early days, might get better in the future, but for now, I think you're right. There are a few where maybe it says, the elongated shape of the ball caught the line, when in reality, the elongated shape may have happened, but it might not have actually touched the line. So you've got to think of this in a 3D world, whereas Hawkeye, the algorithm does seem to convert it to something of a 2D image, especially when it shows it on the big screen for everyone. When we all chant. It's a very nice event, but at the same time, it's iffy at the moment, and especially if people can't understand it, people are less likely to trust it.
Yeah, I mean, they do have also, which seems to be like another new addition, is like the slow-mo of the ball. Like, so it's not just the 2D kind of digital thing. It's actually the slow-mo, like high resolution, high frame rate kind of camera as well, to almost build that trust, like you said. But I think the technology still needs to develop a little bit in terms of like the frame rates and the kind of synchronization across like the different cameras and stuff.
But let's consider it this way. To call this a potential solution from my brain. At the moment, we have lines judges at all major tournaments standing on most lines. And they can cover pretty much all, the tram lines, baseline, service line, etc., etc., etc. If you have people there, you can't have a camera there. So you can't have a camera watch that line, as it were. Therefore, my question is, would it not be simpler, instead of having a person there, to have a camera there? And that camera would then accurately, at a high resolution, be able to see that line. So rather than having one person's brain say out, and then not being able to go back and re-watch that, you'd have a camera who says out, and then you'd be able to go back and watch it just to be sure.
Yeah, well, I suppose, that could be an option. I don't know, the US Open during the pandemic, that I think was it 2020, the US Open then, I don't know how many cameras they were using, whether they were able to use more because there were no line judges. This is where it gets, a bit more like technical, and so, like, I'm sure other people will know like way more than us about this, but
I'm sure of it.
It's just improving that accuracy. And also, I suppose, I don't know exactly, are line judges paid? Because obviously you got the cost that is involved as well. Like, what's the cost of the technology and the software and all that stuff that goes into it? And you're gonna have to use that across every court as well, compared to employing people.
This is a great point. This is probably, I would call it the major counter argument. Tournaments are there to offer prize money. Often they're there to make some money, especially for the upkeep of wherever they are, Flushing Meadows, Wimbledon, blah, blah, blah. So line umpires and chair umpires, I'm not entirely sure how it works for chair umpires at the top level. I think sometimes they get genuine prize money, which is, a little bit of a recognition of, their chair umpiring at a really high level. But pretty much everyone who does lines judging don't get paid. What they do get is expenses. So say you've traveled there from, I don't know, Manchester to London, for example. You will get the expenses paid for your travel there and your travel back and your food when you are there. And I think they also do stays as well for those longer tournaments. Sometimes if it's a day tournament and it's just you going for 1 day of lines judging, because they like to keep it on a constant refresh rate. So it's not always the same people constantly. You'll notice this as well, like even when you watch a match, pretty much at the end of every set or so, or every few games, they'll change the entire team of lines judges. The chair umpire stays the same, but all the lines judges change. So yeah, there is that to take into account. Really, lines judges don't get paid; it's a hobby. Whereas Hawkeye, very expensive. The teams and the companies that run that, I have a mate who used to work for Hawkeye. They regularly charge enormous fees, many, many thousands of pounds just to be able to set it up on one court for 1 day. So you can see how over a tournament, that sort of thing can become very, very expensive.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those things where the cost of technology is going to need to come down over time. At the moment, like the big Grand Slams could afford it. I mean, as the US Open showed, but especially even for the outside courts of those tournaments, like it's probably not going to be affordable. And obviously for other events like ATP 500 events or below, I just don't see that being like feasible at the moment. So it's going to take a bit of time to get there. So hopefully, over time, it's going to be the technology becomes cheaper and it improves. But I think for the time being, it's probably going to be a case of just sticking with the line judges and just dealing with that little bit of inaccuracy. But they are still paying, like even with these line judges, are still paying for Hawkeye. So it's not like these line judges are taking that out completely. So there's still there's cost of both there at the moment. And I can see it eventually them, wanting to just cut line judges out completely and just use the technology. And then you can't really have players arguing with it either, because it's just like, well, it's the same for everyone. There's the same, whatever margin of error for everyone.
Exactly. Well, this is where it comes down to it again. I think, regardless of whether we can sit here and say it's right or wrong, or someone listening goes, oh, I don't like the sound of that, or I do like the sound of that, I think it's inevitable. And I honestly think, as you say, when the cost of it comes down, it will be more widely adopted. Because also the technology has to improve. For example, to put all these cameras around centre court at Wimbledon, that's quite easy, because there's a lot of space. You've got the roof above, and you've got a structure within which to place everything. Whereas when you come across, say, an outside court, there's a lot less of a structure set up around that court in order to place cameras. So the accuracy will inevitably be a bit lower.
Yeah, I think there'll be like a steady crossover, I'd imagine, over time, where it's like the major courts, they get the roofs and all that stuff. Yeah. And the outside courts, like even initially, I think when Hawkeye came in, it was like, I seem to remember the main stadiums got that first for a little bit, and then all the other like outside courts kind of followed suit over time. So probably be a little bit like that. But I mean, let us know what you think, whether you would like to just keep line judges anyway, keep that whole like challenge system involved, because that gets the crowd involved. Would it remove the personality if you just completely move to the technology? Let us know what you think about that. And obviously this is going to change over time, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops.